we could have a discussion with a focus on understanding and discussing what systems are doing that is working, or some interventions that they're trialing. So when you are asked to speak, and I know a number of you have raised your hands and said you'd like to say a few things, can I please ask you to keep that reference in mind, which is to talk about, of course, give us a status update as to what's happening in your country, but also have a focus on, what you see is working, or what is it that you're trialing. Today we have amongst us, we have a very wide spectrum of people, including system leaders, funding organizations, education leaders. We also have a few journalists who are here with us. And unlike last week, today's call is on the record. And so I want you to be mindful of everything you say can be consumed publicly. In terms of housekeeping, as I said, we're going to go through a list of the names of the people that have put their hands up and said, or they want to contribute to this discussion. It is inevitable that we will run out of time, so I beg for your forgiveness in that regard. But if you do want to say or intervene, you can either WhatsApp me, message me. You all know how to get hold of me. But I'd also like to encourage you that whilst there's a chat function on Zoom, that you also use, and I'm sure we are more than capable of doing two things at the same time, and going to the LinkedIn page and actually offering your insights or share information there, because then that will be there for the longer term and won't conclude just with this call. And so on that basis, I'd like to proceed first by asking Andreas, who has joined us as well, to speak. But before I do, I also want to mention that unlike last week, we are not going to go around and make individual introductions. The reason why the document was put together yesterday was because I wanted you all to see who's here. I put links to your social media profiles that you can click on and connect to. And the LinkedIn group has also been set up as a way of networking and exchanging information. So on that basis, if Esteban, it's acceptable to you, I ask Andreas to perhaps speak about this latest report that they've written regarding what they're seeing as the OECD from your research. Andreas, I've allocated anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes for you to speak on this. So if you could present your thoughts, and then if we have any questions, we will take questions for yourself. And then we'll move on to the other system leaders who are here with us, who will tell us their experience. So over to you, Andreas.
Vikas, can we just ask?
Hello to all. And I should say that we have structured our work.
One second, sorry, Andreas. Can I please request everyone to mute their Zoom cameras so that we don't hear the background? So mute your microphones whilst other people are speaking. It's good practice. Thank you so much. Andreas, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, and hello to all. We have been working on two fronts at the OECD. One is simply to create a sort of better understanding of where education systems are in terms of preparing for the digital world. And I'm going to talk about this. And the other part, and actually that's something we've done together with Fernando, is look at what solutions are out there. But for the moment, let me just focus on the first part, the status quo where education systems is. And then, maybe later on we can come to the other part. Starting with the very basics, even in the among most privileged countries, the OECD countries, the wealthiest countries, 9% of 15-year-olds don't even have a study place at home. So when we talk about digital learning, that's obviously the most essential prerequisite, apart from all the parental support, the motivation, the resilience need to bring with you, sort of the basics are there. And when you look to countries like Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand, it's over 30% of young people who do not even have a place. It tends to be students from the most disadvantaged backgrounds, as you imagine. And you can even take a country like Korea, one of the most advanced industrialized countries. When you look among the 25% poorest Korean students, you have basically a quarter of them who do not have a place to study at home. So that is a real issue I think we need to tackle when we talk about technology. A quiet place is a great place to start, but then you need also technology for online learning. And again, huge variability across countries. You go to countries like Denmark, Slovenia, Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, Netherlands, you have basically 95% or more of young people with a computer at home they can use for schoolwork. But again, you go to Indonesia and you have only 34%. So, and again, that's something that is largely, disparate across social economic groups. You take even, a wealthy country like the United States. You go to the students from wealthy families, they have everything, but then, only 3 out of 4 students in the disadvantaged group have a computer. And in Peru, on the other end of the spectrum, you have 88% of students in privileged homes, quite well equipped, but just 17% in disadvantaged schools. So I think actually that's also something. Same picture when you look at internet access. So big disparities across the world and also within social groups within each country. Now, the other part of the equation is, of course, how well schools and teachers and online systems are prepared on the supply side. And the picture here is that across the 80 countries for which we have comparative data, you have a little bit more than 2/3 of young people enrolled in schools where digital devices are sufficiently powered. So 1/3 among those countries of students are not in a place where the school has the technical equipment. The picture is similar, even worse when it comes to the adequacy of software. Again, take it one of the technologically most advanced countries in the world, Japan, and you have only about 40% of 15-year-old students in schools where there is availability of sufficient software. So in fact, the availability of technical solutions is a real issue. And then obviously, technology is always only as good as is it actually used. And again, you have about 65% of young people in schools in the industrialized world where principals consider that the teachers have the technical and also pedagogical skills to integrate technology in education. That's probably the biggest bottleneck that we're going to face, the equipment, the capacity of people, of staff to use technology when it becomes available, highlights sort of the enormous training needs. No? I think later today we're going to discuss a lot of really creative and innovative solutions, and that's the other part of the picture. Now, there's an amazing range of solutions out there, but the human capacity is probably the biggest bottleneck that we need to address. And that's like today in the hospitals. We are talking about machines for breathing, but the biggest shortage also there is going to be people who can operate them. And I think that's something we need to sort of think about. I give you an example, also on equity here. Who is the poster child on equity in education? Sweden. And there you can see, in 89% of privileged schools, teachers are quite well prepared, but only in half of the schools that are disadvantaged. So you can really see even in, the best positioned education systems, in disadvantaged schools, teachers are least prepared. And so once again, technology is going to amplify, not moderate social inequality. That may not always be the case. I'm sure that they can talk to a teacher who understands them, they can connect to other students. And I think that's something that we need to look at. The last point I want to really make just is availability of online platforms. Now, again, in this crisis, that's probably what is most at stake. Now, do we have online platforms that can be deployed at scale? Obviously, you go to China, you have now in less than a month put 50 million young people online. That can be done, but again, the OECD countries, the most kind of industrialized nations, we have only less than half of young people enrolled in schools that have actually, as we speak, a functioning online system for online learning. So once again, lots of interesting ideas, good solutions out there in the field. But when you look at scale and the spread of both availability of technology, its use, and the human capacity to deploy it effectively, I think there are tremendous bottlenecks that education systems will need to address if in this crisis, but certainly beyond. Vikas, you're on mute.
Figuring it out, Andreas, figuring it out. Does anyone have any questions for Andreas? You can unmute yourself and ask the question. We can take 2 or 3 questions. I didn't understand that language. I'd love to know who that was. Okay, so if there's no questions, Andreas, thank you so much. You circulated a report by email.
Yeah.
Is that now public record?
Yeah, it is available online.
Can you send a link to the LinkedIn group, and then we can share it from there?
Mm.
Thank you so much. We also have today with us the Vice Minister of Education from Paraguay, Mr. Griffith. Sir, can you please tell us as to what you're seeing in your education system?
Good morning for everyone.
But before you start, Esteban, maybe you could mute everyone. Thanks. Please, sir.
Thank you. Good morning. Listening to Andreas very carefully. Here we have a situation in Paraguay where we don't have enough connectivity in schools, but I can see it's a worldwide problem. And perhaps I just think sometimes the simplest might be the better. So we have probably 60% of our curriculum connected, 60. And perhaps we have another 20 that can download materials online, but cannot be present in a LMS platform. But we have 20%, still we have a 20% of students that might require education through another system, like, for example, radio broadcasting. And that's why I'm saying perhaps the simplest might be still the better. So we're preparing 3 different approaches in Paraguay. For 60% of them, we're using a LMS platform. We're training our teachers right now. There is a program with 8,000 of them right now, but we need to extend that training to 80,000, which is the whole group of national teachers right now. However, we have a 20% that they have, these 20% they have access to a platform in which they download materials. It's not the ideal situation anyway. And we have these 20%, as I said, that will be covered by radio broadcasting and another system, which is also the presence of written materials, especially for those indigenous population. We still have in Paraguay around 200,000 Native Americans living in here with belonging to 19 different nations, sort of speaking. So this is the approach we're facing. This is the challenge we're facing in Paraguay. We still have few cases of coronavirus. We have around 70 cases, but we were probably the first country to close his borders because we have 2 big countries next to us. We're sort of speaking a sandwich country between Argentina and Brazil, and especially Brazil is a country with dry borders with Paraguay. So we have cities like, for example, Pedro Juan Caballero, which is a town that is absolutely undifferentiated from the Brazilian side. So it's difficult to keep nationals safe However, we have the cooperation of Brazilian authorities, and we're doing it more or less well, but still we know that this will be very difficult to, in terms of avoiding the peak of the pandemic. But however, we are trying to make it flatter, right? So concerning to our education system, we have a curriculum of 1.5 million students. Right now, they are in the process of accessing to those platforms, and we are in the process of teaching our teaching our teachers, sort of speaking. This is the approach we're facing and we're making here, Mr. Vicaspota.
Thank you very much, sir. Can I ask you, in terms of when we think about other inequities, how you're thinking about it? So forgive me, I'm not familiar with your system, but one of the things that came out, and I'll ask the others as well that I'm going to speak about this, is the impact of schools being closed on things like nutrition. So children go to schools, there's probably the one place they get a nutritious meal for the most vulnerable. How are you approaching that?
Well, this is an interesting question, Mr. Vicaspota. We have a system of meals at school, at public schools, and we replace that system for a food kit, which is a bag of 16 kilos with every nutrient they need. I mean, we transfer the regular meal, which was given every day at school for students, into a bag of 16 kilos of food, accomplishing for nutrients, not for, say, candies or sugar or anything, but for nutritious meal. So that has been delivered to every student, is being delivered right now at schools. We didn't find any other system because it's difficult to reach every home. So we're making a delivering system in the very school, so the father goes and pick it up every day. This is what we're doing right now.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for participating. I now want to go to Natalia Kasileva from Moscow. Natalia first came into our awareness because she was a finalist in the Global Teacher Prize, but since then she's become the Deputy Minister for Moscow region. And so Natalia, I'd love to get your inputs as to what you're doing, because I know that you've been active online, at least on Twitter, that I've been seeing that you've been talking about the impacts of the virus on your education system. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Hello, Vikas. Hello, everybody. I hope you hear me and it's okay. We have the same problem with different countries because Russia is very big, and we have more than 42,000 schools, and now we have about 9% students who can't study because they, for example, haven't electricity at all day, and haven't possibility to include in online education. About 20% of Russia haven't computers and internet at home, and they can't have educational process also. And we think about 5 different models for all our students, how we can to organize educational process for all. First is use different educational online platforms, all Russia platforms, or maybe in different regions they have own platforms for school and for teachers, for students. And some of our students can study without teachers, only with parents, because they haven't connect with teachers, haven't possibility to connect with teachers. And it's a very big problem. The second way, we think about students who have computers or gadgets at home, but haven't internet. They can study with textbook only and have possibility to connect with teacher on a mobile phone when their parents come in from work. For example, if parents have mobile phone, and this only some region have a TV channel and school and lesson on TV, but not all Russia, and we haven't our all Russia TV channel to different students to all countries. The third, our model for students who have only mobile phone and textbook. This is a educational process where teacher can send email, can send SMS message for students with exercises and a topic, and students study at home and then send or call for teacher or waiting when this period will be end, and then teacher can see how students study all this time. And we think about all these models. We work with this in High School of Economics with Mr. Frumin, and work together to organize different models with our Minister of Education and our government. And of course, in this situation is important for Russia, and each part, each region decide how to organize this process for all students, for everybody. We understand that this situation is important because different between students mean different in this education. And after this difficult period, when our school will be open, because now we have vacation this week, all our schools are closed. Maybe some of them have consultation on distant in online, and after them we understand that we have difference between students. Somebody have good result and have chance to study, but some of them can not have this process, and next time we need to change our program. We need to change lesson plan, because we have big difference between students. We will have. I published article about mobile school. I think this situation grow new type of school, mobile school, and I include seven steps to organize online education or distant education in different form. This article was published in High School of Economics and in the site. And if you want, I can include in LinkedIn groups for all. for everybody.
Thank you so much, Natalia. I now want to go to Alessandro, who, apart from being an education advocate, is a member of parliament in Italy, and prior to that was chief of staff to the education minister of Italy. Alessandro has been quite fierce in his activism around this subject, given the impact of the epidemic in Italy. So, Alessandro, tell us what you're seeing as to what's happened and what the impact is on your education system.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Vikas, for this kind invitation. In Italy, we are still a bit in the center of the earthquake, I would say. What's going on is that yesterday was announced by the government that the total lockdown that we are facing at the moment, despite the fact that there is a widespread contagion throughout Italy, but it's mainly located in the Lombardy region in the north, is postponed until after Easter. So it was initially foreseen for the 3rd of April, and now it's going on until the 13th of April. In terms of schools, all schools are closed at the moment. So we have 8.3 million students at home with their parents and families. Last week, I was asking in the parliament, even the parliament is almost locked down, I would say, but we had the chance to talk officially in the parliament and publicly with the Minister of Education. And I was asking some figures about what's going on with the schools. And the answer was that we have 6.7 million students who are doing some sort of schooling, distance schooling, but that basically means that we have 1.6 million students completely out of this kind of exercise of agile school, or call it the way you like. So we have two main questions. The first one is, how do we handle, and I was very interested to listen to the colleague from Paraguay before, how do we handle those that are simply outside any kind of program at the moment, for different reasons, because they don't have a laptop at home, they don't have a device at home, for instance, or because there is one device, but the device is used by the parent, by the father or the mother to work during the same time, and for many other reasons. So these are students completely who stay outside any education system for weeks. And what is expected at the moment in Italy is that they will stay out for months, because there is a clear idea that, although this is not public, of course, it's not still official, but there is a chance that we are not going to open schools again before the summer. So it would be a serious threat to their education. And the other point is that for those 6.7 million students who are doing this, it is very different and it's very diverse, the quality of the education in terms of what is provided by teachers and schools and what is received. Because here we are seeing that there is a big issue, as big as you were mentioning before, in terms of widening inequalities. It makes a lot of difference. Schools were born to make sure that your education doesn't depend on your parents. Because everybody needs to have the same chances for the future, irrespective of the family and of origins, And now we are back to that problem, because it makes a lot of difference if your parents are both highly educated. It's not just a question of money; it's a question of attitude, it's a question of culture, it's a question of the level of education that your parents have in terms of how they understand and realize that you have to do some stuff, some school stuff at home, and if they can follow you at home if you're a student. And so there is this is just one example. This is a question of not just devices, it's a question of culture of the families. And and then secondly, there is an issue about the teachers. And here again, there are wonderful teachers who are doing a brilliant job, and others who are simply facing this for the first time. So the good news, if I can say, is that everybody now, in terms of teachers, is forced to try at least. And we will, this is gonna stay with us even after the pandemic is over. So it's a real boost to some extent. Although now it's very hectic and very difficult to implement. The other point I want to mention very briefly is that I'm talking to, we are trying to reach out to the platforms and to the associations of teachers in Italy and principals. And what is coming out is that there is for sure a question of course, I mean, I'm not talking about connectivity, I'm not talking about devices, but let's assume, you know, those who have connection and a device, there is a big difference. There is some problems with the level of digital literacy of teachers, but this is not the main issue. The most relevant issue is about organization. So it has nothing to do with technology, it has to do with the schools were not prepared. Of course, nobody was prepared, to be frank, but the schools are not prepared to organize distant work to avoid, for instance, just to say a very simple thing, you know, that teachers do not overlap in the timing of the classrooms with the students. It may seem a very simple thing to fix, but it takes days to fix, and days are moving on. Last point, there is an issue of what you are doing when you are having a distant classroom. And here is the big problem, is that of course teachers were not trained enough, or there were not enough teachers trained for, and that means basically that most of them are simply trying to replicate the lesson through the web, which is we are perfectly aware is not the case. So there is not really enough, you know, we haven't got the awareness in an extensive, you know, way to reach millions of students in the fact that, you know, teachers should become more tutors in this phase. Because to be frank, if I'm a student in Rome, I don't need my teacher of my school for 1 hour online to tell me the story of, you know, the unification of the country. I can have a lesson by the best teacher in the country, do that lesson on the unification of the country. But I need my teacher there with my schoolmates to understand, to ask questions, etc., etc. So all things we know. I'm not optimistic and neither pessimistic nor optimistic, but I'm simply saying we need to be determined the fact that this is going to stay with us, not just in Italy, of course, everywhere. It's going to take months. So we need to make sure that everybody understands, not the people in this chat, in this conversation, who are all of them already very much aware. We need to make sure that everybody understands outside that basically this is not just a short period of time in which we need to adapt, because 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then, you know, even if we don't manage, it's not a problem. Very soon we will be back to the brave old world. It's a new experience, it's something new, and we need to adapt now to make sure that it's profitable. It's not just a waste of time, and we need to get the experience so that we can plan ahead. Because I'm not sure this will be the last pandemic or the last big threat that we're going to face. So the next one, we need to be prepared. Thank you.
Can I ask a question, Alessandro? In last week's call, what really came through from Thai in particular was systems that have their own learning management platforms seem to be adapting a lot better to the crisis that's unfolding. Does Italy have some sort of a national system?
Well, there is not really such a national system. There are several platforms that are used. This is, for instance, one of the issues. If you talk within the same school, there are teachers suggesting and advising students to use different platforms and different systems. So guess that the same student has to use many platforms, many learning platforms, etc. Of course, there is another big issue, because now the main issue in the mind of the minister, I talked to her yesterday in Italy, which makes sense, because this is the request from the families, is what is going to happen with the exams at the end of the year. So the main point, if I see this from the ministry point of view and from the institutional point of view, is how you make sure that that this year basically will be saved to some extent. There will be some learning still and some exams at the end. So, but it's extremely difficult to assess the quality of the experience, of the learning experience right now. We will need some more time, and it's probably not even, I would say, I'm afraid, not even the most urgent need now that is felt, because families are not asking whether the students are really learning this history of unification of the country, for instance, but are asking whether they will be able to pass the year and then go to the next level next year.
Thank you so much, Alessandro. I'm now going to go to Brian Schroeder, who is in South Africa, in the Western Cape of South Africa. And after him, I'm going to come to Juho and George to talk about your countries and what's happening. Brian is the Superintendent General of Education, the head of the Education Department in the Western Cape. I actually want to carry on from where Alessandra left off, Brian, is to do with exams. In the UK, for example, like, exams have been cancelled. I'd love to, please do tell us what the situation in South Africa is, not just in the Western Cape, and also address that point.
Yeah, great, Vikas. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, colleagues. Quick sketch: Western Cape is one of 9 provinces of South Africa. We've got 1.2 million learners, 1,500 schools, 12 million learners in the country, 12.5 million learners in the country. So we're about a 12th of the total learner, not the most densely populated province, but fairly large province. Now, the government of the Western Cape in our system happens to be a different government to all the other provinces and the national government, but we work very well together. Education is a national competence with certain variances, and so that leads to certain decision-making. In the Western Cape, in many ways, we lead education in our country. We have different ways of doing things, innovative thinking, etc. Technology is one of those. I'll come to your exams question in a minute, Vikas. So in South Africa at the moment, the president has declared a national lockdown of 21 days. That lockdown is now in its 6th day. It lasts till the 16th of April. Schools were to have closed, and they were closed 2 days earlier and are staying closed till the scheduled lockdown is intended to end. There's a lot of conversation at the moment, if you model the pandemic in our country, that the peak will only reach around mid-June, with the pandemic following the normal trajectory till about September or October in our country. So there are a lot of uncertainties at the moment as to whether schools will reopen. In my own mind, I doubt that strongly, but again, it's not public at this point. And at the same time, there's even some consideration that the national lockdown might be extended. It's early days, we're only in the 7th day or so, but it is possible that that lockdown might be extended, particularly because the intention of the lockdown is to get the curve of infections lower and to give the health authorities the opportunity to gear themselves for the peaking that is about to happen in our country. Now, the issues in our space is also that in the Western Cape, we are significantly ahead. Am I still with you?
Yeah. Carry on.
In the Western Cape, we're significantly ahead, maybe with Gauteng, one other province, in the use of technology. And so the system in our country is very diverse across the country. In the Western Cape, we have connectivity for all Western Cape schools. To better or worse extent, we have, I would say, 15 to 20% schools that are fully online, and that teachers are able to have learners utilize online material. Probably in the province, up to 30 or 40% of learners can access online materials. But the online materials are not fully, at this point, covering the entire curriculum, all grades, all subjects, etc. It's not doing that, it's ad hoc. So let me just say that in the South African intent, because connectivity and online ability across the country is not the significant solution, across the country we're talking about television and radio usage, with the buy-in of television and then the screening of lessons. But again, I say that the entire curriculum is not yet appropriately televised, and we have to do a lot of work quickly in ensuring that we are able to get master teachers teaching, as Alessandro had said, for example, across the entire curriculum, and teachers playing the role of tutorship. That looks to be the beginning. In the Western Cape, because of our degree of extent, we will use blended approaches. We had 2 days before schools closed, we had our teachers in schools give appropriate work to learners for the holiday period, and so there's a bit of preparation in the short term for that. For me, the bigger issue is the rest of this year and what happens afterwards. And so our blended approach would be a combination of online for about 30% of learners that can access online, We have a web portal with thousands of digital resources on it that can be accessed, that is curriculum aligned. Many teachers can push content, but because of the huge diversity of poverty, remember we're at the tip of Africa, the huge diversity, poverty differential, etc., and also performance differential, we have about, I'd say, 60% of learners in the Western Cape that is not able to have effective continuous online learning. There are Wi-Fi hotspots where they can download material. Many learners, even in poor environments, do have cell phones, but in many ways limited. However, almost all poor communities have television sets. It's the one luxury that even people living in shacks in informal settlements often have. And so the possibility of the blended approach with TV lessons and radio lessons, we have in our province for about 5 years now, televised with the University of Stellenbosch satellite transmissions called telematics lessons, particularly aimed at poorly performing senior grade or grade 12, end of schooling grade. And we intend to expand that process. A lot is being done quickly. The issue in our country is connectivity. And all of the things that we speak about at the moment across the world would be in the event of Wi-Fi going down. The undersea cables at the moment, 2 of our 6 undersea cables connecting Europe have been damaged again in the last week or so. What's going to happen to schooling? If you want me to look in the crystal ball, I've got a feeling that schools will be closed for significant months more. I think that will challenge our socioeconomic sectors. Nutrition, I can speak about a little bit later. At the moment, just like in the question in Italy, our national minister is saying, well, matrics will write exam the end of the year. And it's important that we do that. The future thinking at the moment would be that you can easily, if our schools are closed for 4 or 5 or 6 months, say till September, then we could progress learners with their age cohort so that we don't clog the education system, because there's obviously another cohort coming in at the bottom. But the successful exit of your senior learners is the key systemic question that one has. And we are already designing plans to maybe have the matrics come into schools, even if schools stay closed, with either rotational lessons or what we call social distancing, so that they are not close together in overcrowded classrooms. But the modeling that we are doing, of course, means that, like the population, we will have significant numbers of teachers for about a 2-month period affected adversely with the pandemic. They'll be out of school, they won't be able to teach, etc. Thinking at the moment is extra lessons, digital online lessons, pushing lessons, TV, etc. across the nation, with the intent of an end-of-year exam still happening. But some of our officials are saying maybe not in the months that it's intended to, which is October, November. It might push out till January of next year, which has all kinds of other systemic implications going forward. Lessons to be learned is, I think, the desire to accelerate the use of technology for effective learning and to help us minimize the inequality gap that exists in this country, even more so than in many countries.
Brian, thank you for sharing that. Can I ask you, in terms of, there's a lot of people on this call who come from private family foundations, philanthropic institutions, who fund NGOs in the education sector. I just want to understand, in South Africa, are you working closely with that kind of stakeholder group to see how they can bolster your efforts?
Absolutely. I want to say again that, unfortunately, and Andreas will share this view, I'm sure, you can't speak of South Africa and the Western Cape as having exactly the same pattern. In the Western Cape, we have a rather different approach. One of those things is we work closely with the NGO sectors. We also, the province at the moment, I think, that has the greatest disaster management integrated teams working, of which education is one strand, working closely in the social sector, where the humanitarian feeding demand is at the moment the greatest. Now, whilst we have school nutrition programs, with schools closed, those kids don't get fed. We're talking about reopening those next week. We're talking about the manner in which it might be possible to, and remember, kids don't, in our country, go to their nearest schools. they bust or they can travel far, which means that they won't necessarily get to their schools where the normal nutrition of 2 meals a day is for about 40% of all learners. Not all kids are fed in the country, 40% would be fed. So we're thinking about that process, and the NGO, education NGO sector and the humanitarian NGO sector are at the moment working very closely and are also channeling ways in which humanitarian aid can help support us where we are efficiently able to feed the challenges that are going to come.
Thank you so much for that, Brian. Juho, we go to you now. Juho used to be the Minister of Education for South Korea, and he's also on the Education Commission. Juho, we'd love to hear your perspective on what's been happening in your country.
Yeah, I agree with all former speakers who emphasized the importance of reducing the gap in online learning through this terrible pandemic. You know that in Korea, although we have, Korea is the first country to introduce 5G network and also home to the world-class smartphone producers, but still we have a very wide gap in online learning opportunity mainly because of two reasons. The first reason is that public school system has not yet been embracing online learning with those cutting-edge education technologies. So our teachers are really good, but mainly resort to the traditional offline pedagogies. Although the second reason is that many students and families from wealthy families, they are already benefiting from the online education opportunities provided by private tutors and so forth. So what I like to emphasize here is that there is already very wide gap in online learning there. And maybe the gap in online learning is much wider compared to the gap in offline learning. So I think this terrible pandemic could be turned into an opportunity if we really can offer online learning opportunity for students from poor families. So that's what we are going to do in Korea. Korea delayed the opening of new semester for more than 5 weeks. Now the government announced that we will open the semester with online learning system. So it's a big challenge for government how to offer online learning opportunity for every children, regardless of their income levels and so forth. So I regard this could be a huge opportunity for government of Korea to offer much better online learning opportunity for students from poor families. And I also think this could be a huge momentum to think about long-term change in education. I really proposed strongly that we should adopt a blended learning system rather than resorting to offline learning that has been lasting for more than 2 centuries. Right? This antiquated, out-of-date learning system should be replaced by new system, which could be, in principle, blended learning system. You really have to be able to combine online with offline to be able to provide the best learning opportunity for everyone. So maybe this terrible crisis could be a good opportunity to turn it into an opportunity. In the short run, maybe we can really focus on reducing the gap in online learning, and in the long run, maybe we can turn this crisis into an opportunity to redesign the whole school system based on blended learning between online and offline, And online, as you know, is really a big big tool that if it could be combined with a cutting-edge education technology tools, it could be really utilized to provide personalized learning opportunity. And in addition, we really have to be able to combine this online learning with offline learning with high-touch approach. Teachers can be trained to offer more human connections, mentoring, and personal guidance, in addition to online learning methodologies. So I really think this is a big opportunity, because even country like Korea cannot embrace online learning technologies. But this coronavirus has pushed every school to adopt online learning without any reason, right? So this could, and lastly, I really want to emphasize that you know that in public health, we can see they are shaping the global consensus on coping with how to cope with this terrible pandemics. What about education sector? We really have to think about shaping the global consensus, how to turn this terrible crisis into an opportunity. We really have to proactively responding to this crisis, rather than just, I mean, the passively responding to it.
Thank you, Juho. Andreas, sorry, George, I'll come to you in a second, but Andreas, can I ask you a question? So the vision that Juho obviously puts out, we've heard a few times in terms of the future being a blended approach and so on and so forth. Which education system comes closest to that today? I think I know what you're going to say, but it's interesting to hear in terms of who's closest to that as a public education delivery offering today. You know, which system does that today?
It's really hard to say. I think what we can do is only judge this on the basis of the data that we get from students, from the opportunities. You'll find a lot of variability within systems. I think the biggest successes are now subsystems, whether it's schools, school networks, or otherwise within a system. If I look at the system as a whole, you know, I think certainly China comes first. You know, that's where you can see AI technology being deployed at the system level. I think the Moscow e-school system we heard about earlier also is an example where you can see a system-wide deployment of technology, but you don't find many of them, really.
Okay, thank you for that. George Papandreou is the former education minister of Greece, as well as prime minister of his country, and someone whose worldly views I enjoy listening to. George, in terms of the political challenge of this, can you speak a little bit about that? I mean, Juho speaks a little bit about why there's been a consensus in the health sector. Why hasn't there been in the education sector?
Good question. Thank you very much, Vikas, for this invitation. Well, I'll give you a little bit of what's happening in Greece, and I think that what was said earlier on by Andreas, this has brought out the issue of inequality in a much more very stark way. We are seeing in the health system where there are inequalities, how much that has been impacted and brought this out by the virus, but we're also seeing in other areas, whether you have access to technology and for school, for information, but also generally we are seeing the problems of inequality, whether you have access to good food, to good services, and I think this is a major issue, which is a wider political issue as we are dealing with this. So this virus has brought out some of the weaknesses, it's testing our systems, and I think that is something we have to work on, if not in the immediate, because we're dealing with crisis management now, but obviously in the medium and long term, this is a big political issue which has to be dealt with, and I'm sure there will be political, ideological discussions around this issue in the following months and years. As far as Greece is concerned, we have a total I would say, almost complete lockdown quite early on. So we have been able to mitigate somewhat of the spike, although we really don't know. It could come in a week or 2 weeks, but it's much less than some of our neighboring countries. We're very unhappy to see what's happening in some of our neighboring countries, and of course in Greece too. Schools have been closed. I'm not in government, but the government has not yet given a total picture of how things are moving. So I have more of an anecdotal view of what's happening, and maybe I can give you a little bit of thoughts on the future, because we dealt with the crisis 10 years ago. I was Prime Minister then, which was a financial crisis. Very difficult, but I think this is even more complex and more trying. But still, one of the things we did was to see how we could be more efficient with less money, let's put it that way, and on principles of equity and access and so on. So what we did in schooling is we actually did, and which has helped us prepare for this pandemic, is we looked at the school system, which had to change, and I think Julie was correct in saying that, you know, we have to move from this model, this industrial model of schools, to a different model, much more with, if we think of models that we existing, the adult education, continuing education, distant education. Of course, we're not talking about adults, and we're talking about K to 12. So it has to be somewhat of a different approach. What we did, first of all, is we digitized all materials. So today you have, the Greek students have all teaching material digitized, and not only for their classes, but for, 100 years before. So you have all the possible books that were ever read in Greece and K to 12 are digitized and online. Secondly, we started developing model teaching, which was said earlier, I think, by our Italian friend, so that you can get the best of teacher to teach you the standard traditional lecture. That hopefully would free now teachers to engage in students in a much different way. So you get the standard material, good teaching, but then the mentoring and the discussions and looking at the individual problems of each student could be done at the local level. We have a national platform for schools, but we also have, each school has, sometimes it's developed its own platforms too, some private, but even in public schools too. We do have the problems that you are mentioning in many countries, Andreas. There is not always universal access to the internet. The costs, there is a cost to be linked up with the internet. Spaces, marginal groups, migrants, refugees, Roma, poor parts of the society, and not everybody does have the necessary tablets, although most everybody now has a phone, a smartphone. Some of the problems we also have, some of the schools were providing meals. This is another issue, it has to be reorganized because of the coronavirus, but that's another issue. I see that the system will have to move. I mean, if we're talking about some of the lessons, is seeing a system where students can be both, as you said, blended, of course, online and offline, but also how do we self-motivate students at this age? How do we self-pace people's learning? What are the types of programs we will self-pace? How do we have more of a self-evaluation or a group evaluation, new types of exams as we're moving online and can't do the traditional types of exams? We also promoted a lot, but this would change the whole examination system in Greece, because we have a quite centralized examination system. User-generated content, teacher-generated content, student-generated content, so that we are using the innovative spirit of the community, the educational community, and I would say society's community to bring in new types of knowledge and learning. Finally, I think technology really has to develop now more if we want to talk about this self-motivated and self-pacing. The types of software in education, gamification, making games out of learning. These, I think, will be an important issue. One final point, Vikas, is that I think we also have to think of content. We have been, our schools have been focusing very much, at least in Greece, and I assume in most countries, moving up the ladder through exams, but basically going towards professional and technical training. And this, I think, type of crisis also shows us the type of civic learning, communal learning, working together, health, how we exercise, how we treat our environment, how we treat the health system, how we preventive wellness, and so on. And these, I think, are very important. Some of the ethical problems, as we are using much more technology, huge amount of capacity and power that we have as humanity, which can be very productive, but also can be very destructive if we use it in the wrong way. So I think these are the issues we also have to think of as we're going through this crisis.
Thank you so much, George. I now go to Refat Sabah, who runs probably the most influential NGO in Palestine, but also is the president of the Global Campaign for Education, which is an alliance of civil society organizations. Refat, over to you. I know you have to leave soon, so please do contribute. You're muted. No, we can't hear you.
You hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Thank you, Vikas, again. I will speak about some missing points in this crisis. I came from a civil society perspective. So as most of the civil society, we found ourselves in a sudden crisis, and we didn't know how to deal with it, as well as the government. But either in the NGOs or in the governments, I think there is 4 missing points. The first one is the wisdom, which they closed the school and they ask the student to go home. They ask the teacher to go home without any plan. Just they said, we have emergency plan, there is something is coming, we don't know, there is a danger, there is a risky, and please go home. So all the teachers in one day with 1 million students, they went home. And this is the case in all Arab countries, actually, without giving any kind of indicators for the people what to do. Just use the technology. And we discovered later that we don't know the technology. We know how to use Facebook, WhatsApp, we know how to use some tools, but as a technology, how we can mobilize it, we discovered that we are very weak. Also, because it's in the middle of the second semester, the Ministry of Education in all the Arab countries, they focus to complete the curricula. And here, there is no, I don't know why they insist on the student to complete the curricula, while there is a way of pushing the learning process to continue. Instead of asking the student and the teacher to link the subject, the knowledge, with the current situation regarding the corona, they just asking them to continue until that list over from the kitchen. They went home and they dancing, they playing, and you are asking them to continue the normal lessons instead of thinking about the drama, the music, thinking about how the student can write about the virus, how can the biology teachers, science teacher, linguistics teacher link their subject with the virus and to try to attract the student and to use the technology for that, how the linguistics teacher can even pushing the student to create stories, they can develop it, they can link it with the technology by making animation. No, they stuck in we have to complete the curricula, as the curricula will rescue the people. So here the wisdom was missing in how to deal with the whole crisis. And still they thought the crisis will end after 1 week. Now they said after 1 month. After 1 month, they will sit after 3 months. So they don't have scenarios in how to deal with the things. I think that's like how to engage all the sector in thinking how we could have more effective education or learning process is missing. Missing both is the solidarity. We discovered that there is a problem in the educational system in the Arab world, which is linked to the global citizenship. We marginalize the social outcome of the educational system. We never give attention to the social outcome. Always, we focus on the academic outcomes of the educational system. How much the student will gain from mathematics scores, how much they will achieve academically from language, from science, but we never ask about their responsibility, about their attitude, about their citizenship values. We marginalize the values system related to the citizenship, where the people can handle the responsibility when the crisis comes. So the solidarity among the teacher, it's missing, because each teacher, each family now, they are in their houses, try to take care about themselves. They are afraid from their neighbors, because maybe they have the virus. If someone comes from her or his neighbor, they became afraid. So the whole society now is going back to the selfishness, I think the educational system is responsible about that. And I can say the Ministry of Education, they should have handled another way of encouraging people to bring the best inside them. As you know, in the global crisis, the best and the worst from the people appear. So our role as educator is to push the positive things from the people, and I think this is missing. The solidarity as a concept and as a core of the citizenship, we should rethink again in the future. And this is what we have been telling always. The global citizen is very important. Even the countries, they are selfishness. Each country, they are looking at its information, information about themselves, and this is also has affected the most population in all the world, including our regional. So I think that the solidarity among the people, I think related to the concept of citizenship. The third point is the partnership. We discovered all what we have been speaking about the partnership, it was just fake. We should have partnership about how the meaning, and we want to have a partnership about shaping the meaning of the things. Now related to the virus, the corona, even this, we don't have the same concept, the same understanding, the same definition what is going on. It's like each one is hiding what he know about this. So it's the partnership is not just to bring you to a meeting. The partnership is mean that I will share you to give the definition, the meaning for the things. Also, the partnership is mean to be part of the solution, not just listening. The third point, and this is very important, is the trust. We discover that we don't trust each other. The government, they don't trust the civil society. They don't trust the community. They thought the citizen is stupid, and all of them, they will get sick if the government didn't take care about them, which is not correct. Historically, as a Palestinian, we should, if you trust the community, this is very important. In these cases, in this crisis, the local communities is very important. Without giving the authority to the local community, you will not be protected. And in education, you have to be decentralized. But not this bill as it's normal, they centralize everything. How you can deal with it when you speak about inequality, how you will reach the poor, the marginalized, the villages, the camps, you cannot. And you kept in your policies saying that I have to take care about the whole community. This is, I think, the four concepts that we have to rethink again. And I will end it with one sentence. The treatment, the solidarity is our treatment, and the justice is our vaccine.
Thank you so much, Rafat. Very grateful for your intervention. I'm now going to go to actually Yasmin. Yasmin, if you're here, can you speak? I can't see you on the screen.
Because I am sorry, I have to leave to UNESCO meeting, and very, very sorry.
Give them our regards. Yasmin, are you here? Okay. In absence of Yasmin, I'm actually going to go to Fernando, because there was a direct link to your work as global citizenship in what Rafat was saying, but you've also been embarking on a project recently and you're publishing some materials. Fernando, if you could please tell us a little bit more.
Thank you, Vikas and Esteban, for bringing this group together, and thank you all of you for your interest. I want to make three brief points. The first one is that we have been talking about the educational impact of this pandemic, but I think we have to think about that impact in the context of the larger systemic spillovers of this pandemic, which I think in some societies are going to cause real social disarray and upheaval. Just think about the impact this pandemic is going to have in jobs, employment, and health among the most vulnerable populations. And what do you think people are going to do when they see their relatives dying because they cannot receive help in hospital because there is no food on the table, and they know that other people have those opportunities? In the United States, for example, there are reports of, on the one hand, growth in sales of guns in parts of this country, and on the other hand, growth in extreme white supremacist groups, people who advocate violent solutions in the extermination of individuals they consider undesirable. I think we are sitting on a time bomb if we don't recognize that this is not a short-term phenomenon, that this pandemic is accelerating existing systemic structural problems, and that it is going to cause real problems. I think that any of us should be very cautious about walking outside in the street at dark tonight. The second issue that I want to talk about is that I don't believe we can solve this problem at a national level. In fact, if anything, governments have been part of the problem. Simultaneously, this problem requires global solutions, effective global solutions, and local solutions. Let me give an example of global. As the Vice Minister of Paraguay mentioned, there are some countries that in the short term have absolutely no hope to provide online education to their kids. A country like Paraguay, a country like Honduras, a country like El Salvador is totally vulnerable and screwed up in this crisis unless there is a way to provide not latest generation solutions, but last generation or previous generation solutions. Now, in Latin America, Mexico has for the last 30 years developed the best models of educational television. They own 2 channels in a satellite where they broadcast an entire curriculum. Is it as good as online? No. Is it better than nothing, which is what most kids in Paraguay are going to get? Absolutely better. And the only thing that it would take to give those kids in Paraguay who have educational television would be opening the signal and getting governments to sign an agreement to allow that. It is governments that stand in the way of making this possible, as well as private groups that have until now been profiteering from the lack of access to global free public goods like that television. So we need those global responses, and they are available in some cases. It is possible to recycle, repurpose existing materials and make them into global public goods. But we have to ask, what are the interests that stand in the way? On the one hand, we have the traditional international development architecture that is just not fit to respond to this crisis in real time. When 2.5 weeks ago, I wrote to friends in leading international development organization asking, why don't we do something? Let's stop talking about it and let's help governments understand the severity of this crisis, understand that this is not a 2-week phenomenon, that this is not a 3-month phenomenon, that this is going to last months, and that we're going to lose an entire generation. This is going to be the greatest disruption in educational opportunity that we have seen in the last century. The only person who responded in real time was Andreas. He'll have my eternal gratitude for that. And within 24 hours, we had developed a survey. Within a day, we had collected the data, and you all received a copy of that data. I have put online an invitation to come and discuss it. And once we produce a report, I got a call back from those I had reached to. I'm talking about heads of major institutions. Why don't we do something? And I said, yes, but let's do it right now. This is not a crisis that can wait for 2 months until we produce a report documenting the problems. We need solutions. So I think we have a need for a more agile, a more effective international architecture, and for people who frankly want to get shit done and who understand that we are in the midst of a potential time bomb that is going to create serious disruptions like the depression of the 1920s caused in this country. Finally, I think that there are opportunities at the local level to solve this problem. Obviously, a local community cannot provide internet to the kids. They cannot provide material resources. But we can have new forms of solidarity that have been absent in a long time. Looking out for your neighbor, looking out for the sick parent who's sick with COVID, who's gonna mind the kids. I serve on the board of a charter network organization that serves 10,000 poor African-American and Latino kids in this country. You have no idea the challenges we face, because when these kids go to their homes, those homes are part of the problem of these kids. That is the reality. The reality of poverty is that some kids are just born in the wrong homes, and their parents are not the solution for these kids. The parents are the problem for these kids. And so we need community solidarity where we all mind everybody's kids. And maybe that's gonna happen. And we need to find ways to create new forms of local and global organization that can help governments do the right thing and hold them accountable. My own government, Massachusetts, touts itself of being the best education system in the world. I can tell you I've been trying to get the attention of our secretary, of our commissioner of education, and until 2 weeks ago, they were telling schools, this is a 2-week problem. This is like an extended vacation. And the teachers and the principals are desperate, saying we need good government. So I commend you on convening this group. I hope that this group will find ways to get shit done, because this is not a problem that requires people that want to contemplate it. And if we don't actually do something and find a way to do something, we are going to all regret it, either when this hits us directly or when someone close to us dies because of the social violence this pandemic is going to generate. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando. I think there's a natural segue to Dennis from the Lemon Foundation in Brazil. Dennis, if you could just speak a little bit, but there's a comment over here. Can we give Fernando a round of applause? So you're all on mute, doesn't really count. Dennis, over to you.
Thank you, Vikas. And I agree, Fernando, with your sense of urgency. I think it's very important in this moment. In Brazil, along with several friends who are also on the call. Sorry, I got... Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, you're on, Dennis.
Okay, so in Brazil, we started to organize very quickly to respond to the crisis. It's a very complex country with a lot of the same inequality issues that a lot have mentioned earlier. And basically, the response right now has been divided into 2 phases. One is organizing the curriculum, and I want to pick up on the point that other people mentioned regarding what we don't have all the curriculum online, as in South Africa or in Paraguay. And I think here is important to recognize that we're not going to have the same kind of curriculum being taught at home in very hard conditions than we are having now in a regular school, right? So I think it's very important. The first thing that we started to do was really to look at the national learning standards in Brazil and select what are the key competencies that students cannot lose. So instead of trying to teach everything during a time of crisis, at least try to find out what's the core that every kid should be getting access to, even if we understand that it will be hard to get access in the same level as they have inside the classroom. So after having this, we have organized different formats for distributing content. So tomorrow, the state of Sao Paulo, for example, is launching their app. The app is already available for 3 million students, where they have video lessons and exercises and content curriculum materials for students to use. They will have 1 hour of live classes every day, and the rest is they're going to do it on the app. And the interesting part here, as they are doing in other parts of the country, is that this is zero rating mechanism, where the phone companies won't charge the students. So even students who don't have Wi-Fi at home, can only have 3G or 4G connection, they are going to be using this for free. Alternatively, we have organized a chain of distribution through television stations. So already 17 television stations have committed to distributed content online, over their broadband, and allow for kids who don't have internet connectivity to at least watch through TV. I just want to call attention that the first state that was already working and is already going with their curriculum since the beginning of last week is the state of Amazonas. So it's interesting now that states that were already ready to use technology because of the local characteristics that made it so hard for teachers to reach every community are now being able not only to have some sort of curriculum available for the kids to work, but they're having online lessons, right? Through TV, satellite networks that were already in place. So now a lot of states in Brazil are replicating the Amazonas model, which I find very inspiring, that, you know, a lot of richer states are learning and how they can do it. And now Bahia, Alagoas, Maranhão, they're all replicating this model with distance learning through TV, and a pool of teachers, a small group of teachers who are available to discuss with students over chats, WhatsApp, to kind of, you know, try to get them engaged and participate. So this is the first phase. So it's getting the curated content, the core of the content out there in models that try to face the inequality that's inherent to our country. The second part of the work, which I think we haven't discussed as much, is preparing when we go back to regular school. All these efforts to provide online learning and distance learning won't be enough, right? We are sure that the rest of the school year will be very affected. So, in that sense, the fact that we have a few months ahead of us gives us enough time to plan with the school districts how they are going to organize the lessons. So this is that we have a task force with all the state secretaries of education and all the municipal secretaries of education, reorganizing, and with the partnership with a lot of the foundations here, Angela, Priscilla, and Claudia, to reorganize the school year and to make sure that when we go back to classes, there are remediation efforts in place, and there are capacity to diagnose where the kids are, how they came back from this period, and try to accelerate the learning over the next few months. In Brazil, we are in the middle of the school year, so it's different than from the Northern Hemisphere. So we have a little bit more time to recuperate. And yesterday, the last point I want to make, the government approved the new regulation, changing the need for 200 school days to focus on 800 school hours. So we know that's not, I mean, it's embarrassing to say that Brazil only teaches 800 hours mandatory in a year. It's very low, but at least having 800 hours allows for some of that to be covered online right now, and some of them to be extending a little bit the school day when the classes are back in order. So there are some things going on. I'm very happy to share some of those. Just one number that I think it's interesting. The municipal secretary of Rio launched their app, and their app got 500,000 downloads in the first week. So it seems the students want to learn. They are trying to get some information. So we are measuring all that, gathering all the data on first that the projects are out there and working, and then we're going to measure the results. And I'm happy to share with all of you the learnings over the next few days and weeks.
Thank you so much, Dennis. I now want to go to Priscilla, and I think I've said this in the past for some of you who have attended these calls. is that in Brazil, I found that civil society organizations were pretty strong. And what the likes of the Lemon Foundation, Itaú Social, Claudia have done is invested not just financially, but also in terms of making sure that Priscilla's organization, and forgive me if I mispronounce, Todos pela Educação, if I said it with the right strain, is leading the fight, as it were. On behalf of our other Brazilian friends, Priscilla, can you give us a perspective on what's happening? Are you there, Priscilla?
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, now I'm here. So hello, everyone. So thank you, Vikas. It's a pleasure to be here. I think Dennis showed a broad scenario that's going on here in Brazil. Thank you, Dennis. Actually, Fundação Lema is leading this whole coalition to help governments and civil society here in Brazil to respond as quickly as possible and as deep as possible. What I wanted to add to Dennis' presentation, short presentation, is we are also doing a regulatory effort. So Dennis mentioned one of the points here. So instead of focusing on days, to focus on hours, and the planning, that we're helping all governments to do is to go back to schools and make sure that 800 hours are of learning, right? So this is one of the things. The other is very crucial here is with the National Education Council is to measure, and I think it would be amazing to have inputs from all of you, is to have parameters of what can we consider as online classes to be considered as learning. So how can we consider these digital classes into the 800 hours that we have to achieve this year? So what are the parameters? So if a school just sends a homework for the students, and the student do the homework and doesn't have feedback from the teachers, does it count as a class or not, or just a homework? Right? So this is one of the things that we are also doing here to give legal parameter and also learning parameter for all networks. Because as Dennis was mentioning here, we have the work that we have to do right now, and students are at home. We cannot deny it. It's not going to be perfect. We have to do the best for this time. And we also have to do the best for when they come back to schools. In the middle of this, we have a huge gray area. So we have students here in Brazil that are having digital classes with feedback from their teachers. They are doing a great work. We have, of course, a very diverse situation in the country. So we have very good situations, very good offers, education offers. But we also have students that are not having nothing. In the middle of all this, we have a huge gray area. So what can we consider as real classes, real learning? So this is one of the efforts that we are also doing here in Brazil, is to give parameters of what a digital class should be and what digital class should be considered as one of the 800 hours to be considered in the whole year. So this is the only point I wanted to add to Dennis' talk.
Thank you, Priscilla. As a matter of fact, I think it's a great point. And going to Fernando's point, I think this is one of the key issues that we're going to have to review. Unfortunately, I would have to say that Argentina is struggling to get to 800 hours. And so we're also considering how we can add hours through technology. Obviously, we are also in a lockdown, and schools have been closed for the last 3 weeks, and it will go through Easter too. So the question here, and I think Fernando is one of the biggest challenges for us, is as we get technology through schools and through society, how do we end up putting more hours through different media? into the education system as a formal hour. We need to our goal would be to get closer to 1,000 hours total, and it is hard for us to measure, as Priscilla was saying. I think that's a common challenge, how to measure that those hours are really acquired or not, and how do we really get those into the formal system. I think that's a huge challenge, and I think Priscilla would like to keep in touch and see if we can work together in looking at that. We have a similar organization. Actually, it was created looking at Todos por la Educación here. It's called Argentinos por la Educación, and they are working in measuring and helping build statistics of the Argentinian education system, and I think that's something they have in their mind, and I will try to see if we can get together in a specific call regarding that issue.
Thank you, Esteban. I now want to pivot and go to another continent. So I'm going to ask for Vandana Goyal, who is the executive director, or the managing trustee rather, for Avanti Fellows in India, to speak a little bit about what they're seeing in India. And I know that she's part of a task force at the government tackling coronavirus. Vanda, over to you.
I was actually just going to post, hi everyone. Sorry, my kid was just jumping on me, which is part of the effects of this lockdown that's unanticipated. But one of the things that we're trying to I was going to ask the group, a lot of the education leaders around the country are actually caught up in immediate relief work for our students. So while we're thinking about how to facilitate remote learning in the long run, we're actually currently caught up in trying to think about how to get families in slums, cash transfers, groceries, hygiene kits to deal with the lockdown and lack of movement that's been enforced in India until April 14th. So we've turned into kind of humanitarian crisis managers. So currently I'm actually trying to mobilize the group of these education leaders to mobilize local tailors in the slums to make masks, because it seems like one possible way out of the lockdown is for everyone to wear masks. That seems to be the emerging evidence, globally, that 50% of the cases are asymptomatic. And so to prevent spread, we actually need to encourage everyone, especially in densely populated communities, to be wearing masks. So I guess right now what we're struggling with is, sorry, say hi to everyone. Say hi everyone. So what we're struggling with right now is how to be in touch with our students. A lot of our students from the slums. So I'm I've coordinated a group of education leaders around the country who work in with thousands and thousands of families across India in densely populated areas. Most of those families have actually gone back to their villages right now. And I think someone posted on the chat about school dropouts being a concern. So we're trying to stay in touch with the families. We're trying to send daily activities via WhatsApp and SMS. And we're also trying to coordinate humanitarian work. So in terms of, to Fernando's point, we're actually just trying to get a lot of shit done in a really short amount of time. We're trying to do this before April 14th, when the lockdown actually opens, so that people feel safe to come back to Mumbai and to Delhi and to other big cities, as well as we have systems in place to think about how do we, about 1/3 of our families at least don't have smartphones. So if schools are locked down until July, then how do we actually get learning to happen? So we're thinking about radio. I think someone from Paraguay mentioned radio, but we're also thinking about WhatsApp videos. We're thinking about, can we actually switch completely to blended learning? So not hire more teachers, buy all of our students tablets that they can use in their communities. So very interested in the action side of this group and very happy to share the solutions that are coming out. We actually have a Google Doc with all of our the things that we've already done. A lot of this is being done right now since we're all stuck in our homes through parents. So I would encourage all of you to think about how you use your PTAs and school management committees in your school systems to mobilize resources locally when you're in a lockdown situation, because that's how we're actually facilitating delivery of groceries and hygiene kits that are essential right now.
Thank you so much, Vanda. Alongside with you in India, we also have Safina Hussain, who runs an awesome girls education NGO called Educate Girls that does phenomenal work. Safina, do you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Vikas. This is a great discussion, and I really did want to say we work on girls' education across 15,000 villages, almost 2 million children daily. And what we're seeing is a much, much, much deeper impact on the girls. In tribal, I mean, you know, girls' education, most of the girls are out of school because of the 2 Ps, poverty and patriarchy. And the COVID crisis makes both the Ps much worse for the most vulnerable populations. A lot of the girls will get pushed out of school, forced into child marriage. We're already, even in the Western world and everywhere, seeing much higher rates of domestic violence. And that's going to impact our girls even further. Care of household work, all the rest of it, and increased hunger. I think with the schools shutting down, midday meals not being available, in our homes, girls eat last and they eat leftover. So I think what we need, and I would really urge everybody to think about it, is whatever policies you're thinking of, whatever execution, have a strong gender lens. Because inequity, access, everything gets much, much, much more, you know, much worse when you put a gender lens to it. So that would be kind of one thing. What we happen, and I think I'll just run through a couple of the things that we've been doing. I think right in the beginning, I think it was Andreas made a really good point about, you know, we need talent. We need the right people on the front lines for this. And so one of the first things we did was we ensured that our field staff were paid before time, and that all of those who make minimum wage or just a little bit higher than minimum wage were all given a special allowance of 5,000 rupees for this month so that they were protected and motivated, because we will need the most motivated people on the front lines, you know, when this is over, and to protect our children. So first and foremost was that, making sure that there was awareness. Secondly, we have just during the lockdown period, because we can't be in the schools in the community, we've just souped up all of our child protection training, community mobilization training, enrollment trainings for all of our staff virtually. So that as soon as the lockdown gets lifted, we have a much, much, much more stronger team to actually be able to hit the ground running. We do door-to-door surveys, and we have extremely individual household level data. So we're also using the lockdown period to make micro plans for each village, each child, each household. So that again, not only will we have a highly trained team on the front line, and just to give you an example, we have about 2,000, close to 2,000 staff and around 15,000 community workers. So we will ensure that we will have solid micro plans so that we can start tracking. In the meantime, as Vandana said, we are all working on relief efforts, making sure the relief is getting to the last mile, and really supporting our communities in whatever way or form that we can. But thank you, Vikas.
Thanks a lot, Safina. I want to go to Musharraf Zaidi from Pakistan. Musharraf has been a journeyman when it comes to education, and he now runs a think tank in Pakistan. Musharraf, please give us what's happening over there.
Thanks, Vikas. For starters, I've got a lawnmower close by, so I apologize for the extra noise. What's happening here is, and I've been listening intently to the discussions, and there's so many obvious, at some level obvious, but maybe not so obvious, but so many things that bind policy thinkers in terms of how we're going to respond to this together, in terms of what it is that we're all dealing with. I think there's been 2 or maybe 3 sort of rounds of impact that we've seen from a policy perspective. The first is the big question about closures. It wasn't obvious 2.5 weeks ago that schools were going to close. Some private schools and private universities made that decision before the government did. Once the government, and again, the governments were divided. Provincial governments were acting in, some provincial governments were acting in one direction, others were resisting. But once the first provincial government made that decision, everybody else fell in line. I think the first big policy thing that we heard was that the Higher Education Commission chose to ensure that things would go on in terms of the schools, the university calendar, and that all classes would be online. And that immediately sparked a number of, I wouldn't say protests, but there was a couple of hashtag movements, and there's been a lot of online activism against the online classes for a number of reasons. The primary 2 being access issues for many students, because 4G and LTE broadband connectivity is not a given in Pakistan. Out of the 160 odd million telephone subscribers in a country of 220 million, there's about 40 million broadband subscribers. So that means, you know, roughly 1 in 4 have that access if we assume that the university population is a cross section. But even if it's skewed in the favor of people that already have it, there's still likely a substantial number of students at the university level that don't have access. So the idea of online classes is problematic from an access standpoint. It's also problematic from the standpoint of the availability of teaching methodologies and material that can adequately do the job that needs to be done. At the school level, I think Pakistan's system is divided into a whole bunch of different kinds of schools, but without going into too much detail, there's been a clear reinforcement of the inequality debate here, because elite private schools have been able to adjust reasonably quickly. My kids go to a school that was using Class Dojo even before this happened. They adapted things to Class Dojo immediately, and then they realized that Class Dojo wasn't going to be able to fulfill all the needs, so they transitioned to Microsoft Teams. Within, I think, a 4 or 5 day turnaround period, they began Microsoft Teams-based classes today. Obviously, not every kid in this country, in fact, most kids in this country are not as lucky as my kids, and so a lot of private schools have just shut down. There's no online classes. Government schools have chosen the mass access weapon of choice happens to be TV. So both the federal government and the government in the biggest province are touting their transition to television content. I can assure all the members of this call, and unfortunately, it doesn't portend well, because again, there is a content problem. We just don't have the content or quality of teaching material that will enable that to happen without a transition. Very quickly down the road, what we're anticipating, what we're already seeing some signs of, one provincial government decreed that private schools will only be able to charge half the fees that they usually charge, even though in many cases private schools continue to pay out salaries, continue to pay out rent. But obviously parents are well within their right to wonder why there shouldn't be some sort of a COVID-19 adjustment if regular business as usual is not continuing. Down the road, I think this is going to grow into a much bigger crisis in terms of school fees. And if this lockdown situation lasts anywhere beyond September in terms of the impact, there's going to be a substantial, very, very substantial change here in Pakistan, as there will be, I'm sure, in all the other countries that are represented in this conversation.
Thank you, Musharraf. I'm now going to go to Mark Sparvel. Mark, thank you for staying up. I know it's very early in the morning where you are. Mark, when you look at what's happening technologically, Mark is at Microsoft. Obviously, Teams is what a lot of schools are using. What is it that you're seeing?
Yeah, thanks. And it is early. Good morning, everybody. You can hear me, just give me a thumbs up, Vikas. Good, I'm juggling. As you can see, it's very dark here and everybody's asleep. So I guess what we're seeing globally, and I put some, I popped into the chat pane the announcement of the coalition with UNESCO to particularly focus in around better understanding the different scenarios for remote education that we've heard from here. And certainly what we're seeing and what we're working with at the moment with the coalition is around, you've got either no connectivity, so maybe broadcast through radio, TV. You've got other parts of the globe which have emerging connectivity where it's erratic, maybe low bandwidth, intermittent, there's offline and online modes. And then of course you've got another slab, which is full connectivity with live class meetings. So, what we're currently doing with our partnership with UNESCO is bringing together partners, and we've heard this within this conversation, that the way forwards is through partnerships. So with GSMA, telco providers, tech companies across the board. So people that maybe have been seen as competitors working together to bundle together solutions and packages to get those out to those areas that are most at need. So at the moment, what we're doing as a company is, obviously where internet connection is available, we're making sure that things like Office 365 are completely free. Access to Teams is completely free. And then wrapping around engineering support in the background, like a lot of tech companies are doing at the moment, to respond rapidly to the increased demand, which has been massive, and ensure that digital tools can be used in offline modes as well as online modes. So there's a range of things happening across the board. I guess for us, the number one thing is partnering with groups like OECD, with UNICEF, with World Bank, with other organizations across the globe to see where we can lean in and help provide some of the technical solutions, but also the pedagogical support for teachers as they move to delivering learning. It's not business as usual. This is unexpected, unprecedented, it's unplanned, and at the moment it's still a highly volatile and reactive environment. So we're conscious that the well-being of teachers and leaders is significant, alongside obviously the well-being of learners.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Harry, I want to come to you because I know you often speak about this. Maybe you could also provide your comments. Harry is at the World Bank, is an education practice manager, looks after Central Asia, if I'm not mistaken. Harry, over to you.
Thank you, because Europe and Central Asia, thank you for this invitation, and it was great to hear everyone. A couple of things that concern us very much, and I'm sure all of you, but I just wanted to mention them. And this is the long-term effects that this crisis will have. Obviously, we're very much focused, like everyone else, on the immediate concerns, especially for the children have to be out of school and how to support the school systems. But going forward, and just from a very quick review of what's happened past crises and pandemics, we've seen the long-term effects take a very long time. Just by chance, there was a report on the 1918 pandemic, and it showed that children who were in utero at the time of the pandemic, they and their descendants continue to feel the effects in terms of socioeconomic development and educational background. So we're going to see many long-term effects. The financial crises of the past have shown that those with higher levels of schooling have been better able to weather the crisis and come out in the end with even higher earnings and employment prospects. So those who are at risk of dropping out are at even greater risk today, and the consequences will be greater than they would have been otherwise. So a couple of things that are very important, some practical concerns that we get from all of our partner governments are school closures and school openings. very, very practical, important questions. Examinations. Some countries have very high stakes examinations. Some have postponed them, some have canceled them, but still others have yet to make a decision, and they're seeking guidance. The question of learning loss is very real. We've seen from past crises, again, that there is learning loss, even with the mitigation measures that have been put in place. Some students will suffer learning loss. And in addition, in the school systems that are northern countries, going into summer vacation, there's also a summer learning loss phenomenon that seems to affect mostly disadvantaged students. This will add to the learning loss that the coronavirus presents us with. And the consideration there is how to make up for this learning loss through perhaps summer school. And we've seen a couple of education systems already discuss summer school programs. The bigger response, and I would be happy to hear views on this, is how to raise awareness of the need to not only not slow down on education investments, but in fact to ramp them up, sort of a stimulus for the education system. In the U.S., a commentator called for a Marshall Plan for education going forward. And I think without this, the inequities that we're already seeing will increase, and the education systems will be negatively impacted for a long time to come. Thank you, Vikas.
Thank you, Harry. I now want to go to Finda Karuma, who's at ECOWAS in Nigeria. Finda, I know that you have connectivity issues. Can you hear me and can you speak? You may want to keep your video off. Finda, can you hear me? Okay, we're going to move on. I hear something. Finda, you there?
Yes, I am. So sorry about that. The internet is just erratic in Nigeria.
Okay.
How do you do? Hello, everybody.
Hi. Please tell us what you're finding in West Africa.
Well, I am the Vice President of the ECOWAS Commission, and of course, you know, COVID has created a lot of disruption in the educational sector and the health sector in particular. These are the two areas we're looking at as we focus on human capital. So we have held virtual meetings with the Ministers of Finance, and we're hoping to hold a virtual meeting with Ministers of Education sometime next week. I am aware that many of our member states are opting for radio programs for now because of the reach. The internet is not very penetrated in many of our member states. So I think for now they're looking at radio programs that would help the primary school goers and secondary school goers for now. The university ones are looking at online programs. So that's what we're looking at for now.
Finda, you in our WhatsApp chat, you actually spoke about wanting help and assistance and ideas. From the discussion that you've heard, from the discussion you've heard today, is anything that, of interest to you that you want to follow up on? And you've got the opportunity of this group being here. So please state what you found interesting that could work in your region.
Well, I came in late, actually, as I said, because the internet was intermittent, I could not hear a lot of the discussions, but I think what I shared with you yesterday, you know, I can just highlight 2 or 3 things. If we're moving towards homeschooling, we need to understand that most of the parents are illiterate, and we would have to look at the adults in the family who are educated. So one thing we're looking at is to see how teachers could train parents in homeschooling. And then secondly, of course, the governments themselves are talking to the radio stations. We're looking for subsidies in which we would help the community radios, which have a much larger reach, the national radios and the private radio stations to actually run these programs. And then if we could also get videos from more successful programs in Brazil, for example, or the US or the UK that we could send to member states, in English and in French and Portuguese, because these are the 3 languages. That would help for now. Finally, we're looking at solar radios as an option only for the border communities and the more remote parts of the country. Because, well, trust me, I mean, the rural poor represent 70% of our member states, and they cannot afford to pay for batteries, you know, for school programs. Sorry. Are you there?
Yeah, we're here.
Finally, the final thing we're looking at is to see how we could shape an emergency policy or strategy on education. Because first it was Ebola, now we have COVID-19. You know, our countries need to be prepared for these kinds of pandemics, you know, so that they can have a roadmap that would be harmonized to ensure that in the event of such, you know, pandemics, they can just roll. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Finda.
Sure.
I want to go to Fulawe. Fulawe is also in Nigeria. She's the CEO of Teach for Nigeria, very much at the coalface when it comes to education delivery. And I visited just recently. So Fulawe, can you speak a little bit about the teacher capacity challenge that you face and what you're doing about it?
Thank you so much, Vikas, for this opportunity. And, you know, just when this happened, it was when I realized just how unprepared we were to even deal with anything like this. I remember placing some of the calls to the State Universal Basic Education Board in the states that we're working in, and they had no clue as to what was going to happen post schools being shut down. I remember speaking to head teachers who equally had no idea, and commissioners. And so we stepped in and started thinking, how do we work with you to sort of like help children to have access to learning during this shutdown? We started thinking about radio lessons, and then the students, the fellows on our program, the participants of our program started pre-recording materials and lessons, and then they were trying to decide whether it'll be upper primary or lower primary. What I'm saying that is lacking is sort of like the coherence and collaboration across the teachers, the head teachers, the people in government and in leadership. And so everyone is doing different things, and there is no synergy across all of that. So I think here is an opportunity for us to innovate. There are lots of private people who have ideas, who are innovative, but I see there is also a mindset challenge in governance and in the people who are managing education. And so it's to say, how do we help them to see how this could really work, and then how can they support for this to scale? One of the states that we spoke with, in the states that we're working in, the head of the State Universal Education Board said to us, for example, we have to go and raise the funds to engage the radio channels and the radio station. And so it's also like them not even